How many of you have heard something along the lines of this? Our organization needs to raise $10,000 for such and such a project. So what we should do is find 10 people who are going to give $1,000 each. Have we heard something like that? That it is not right or wrong to think that, but it is probably disassociated from reality. That is just not how money comes in. One of the great mysteries of the world for me is that God has not distributed wealth evenly in this world. We have a lot to do with that. Our sinfulness has a lot to do with that as well. But one of the facts of life is that some people have more money than others, and we need to take that into account when we raise money. So if we are raising $10,000, and we hit our goal, what does it likely look like? How many donors do we have, and who's giving how much? Yeah. Probably about 50% of it from one person is likely. And then it would get, those amounts would get smaller and smaller. But without those big gifts, there is a very small likelihood that we're going to hit our fundraising goals. And so we just need to be very attuned to the fact that even as Christians, the biggest gifts are going to come from a very small number of people, and they're going to have a disproportionate impact on the success of our fundraising projects. Does that mean we value those people or more than the people who give very modestly? Absolutely not. It was just mentioned that we should thank exactly the same, that God cares about the giver. He doesn't care as much about the gift. But we need to be sure that we are paying attention to those who have the capacity, who God has given the capacity to make a big difference. No, the insight is wonderful that throughout the Bible, God warns very directly against showing favoritism to the wealthy, whether it's James 2 or whether it's in the prophets. And aren't we just perpetuating some of the evils that God doesn't want us to perpetuate by giving disproportionate attention to those at the top of the income pyramid? It sounds like you got something to say.
I've done quite a bit of thinking about this, and a lot of people trip up on this. One way I've thought about it as a leader in raising money for an organization is we talk to donors all the time about their stewardship responsibilities, how they use their time and their money. And I think as leaders in our organizations, we need to make those same kinds of decisions. With the reality where we know that money is not distributed equally, and if we don't have gifts of a particular size, we probably cannot accomplish our ultimate goal. So what is the stewardship of the CEO's time? Now, I want that CEO, while he's visiting in a town, a person who has the capability of giving $1 million to the organization, I want that CEO to also stop in on that lady who has been giving $50, $100 a year for 20 years. That keeps our hearts soft, but I think we as leaders have to wrestle with, we make priorities all the time about what we spend our time on, what we do. And I think part of that as a leader of the organization is if we're gonna achieve the goals that we want, we are gonna have to engage people like this. What makes it ungodly is when we say, I don't care about the people that give $1,000 or less a year. They're not going to do it for me. That is a totally ungodly approach to it. On the other hand, I want us to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves.
One of the ways, and similar to what he said, that I navigate that, obviously I spend a lot of time with donors who are on the higher end of the income scale who give us larger gifts, and I think that is good stewardship of my time and the way that, and for our organization. I make calls every week to just thank donors, and I make sure that a bunch of those calls are at the other end of the spectrum. I have our board chair who has tremendous financial capacity. I have him write thank you notes to high-level donors, and I have him write thank you notes to low-level donors. Yeah, the question is there a way to figure out what is the best way to steward your time and to guard your heart by spending time with everyone and not just the wealthy? Well, I think you nailed it. There's no rule. There's going to be no proportion that I can give you that would be, I think, wise. I think you need to look at your own time and your own goals, and are we making the fundraising progress we need to make? If we're not, I might be neglecting some of the folks who are capable of really moving us forward in a big way. And so, I just don't know that there's an answer to that. I just, in my work and in my practice, I just know it's important to be consistently being with all different types of donors and learning from them and thanking them. I can't give you a number, I don't think. Maybe you have a better answer.
I would just remind us that high financial capacity people are needy people too. They need to grow in their faith and their obedience. They need relationships with key people as well. And I see this actually particularly in the church. A lot of pastors don't know how to relate to people of high financial capacity. They kind of just leave them alone. And some of those people say, I'm a whole person. I have more than a wallet here. I would love to be engaged in a meaningful way. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later this morning. I just think if we have the soft heart and understanding that giving is precious in God's sight, whether the capability is small or great, and kind of balancing that with the needs of our organization. I think one way we can guard our organization about being too tilted toward the wealthy, and I think this gets to the James issue. I'm not sure we need to parade our major givers in front of a group of people and say, these are our stars here. They gave the big gift. Like I said before, I've been doing this long enough to know that many of the small, humble gifts are given with a whole lot more sacrifice than the large ones. And if we have that perspective as leaders, we could share that with our whole constituency. And I think that makes it more palatable for everyone. And I think it's about as fair in this world as we can be while achieving our goals.
Donors are really different too. So I can think of one donor couple who gives my organization about $150,000 a year. That's a lot of money. They don't really ever want to meet. They like that I send them updates via email about what we're doing. They like that they get other communications from my organization. But they don't really want to spend a lot of time together. And so it's a very low maintenance relationship for me, and holy cow, low maintenance for $150,000 a year. That sounds like a great deal. But there are donors who give $5,000 or $10,000 who I'm involved with who want a lot more of my time and attention, and you just have to be reasonable in how much you give because there's a limited number of hours in the day. So I think a lot of it depends on who the donor is as well, and giving them what they're asking for within reason. Capacity to give is both a matter of wealth and a matter of will. So we probably all know people in our orbits who have the capacity to give a lot more than they're giving to us, and they only give this much. We have some people whose capacity might not be that big who end up giving really big gifts because of the way they live their lives or their passion for our organization. So it's not just about finding the richest people out there. It's about finding the people who have a passion for your organization and passion for the mission of your organization. One of the fundraising consultants who I have learned a lot from, he makes a list of he encourages people to make a list of donors and have two categories. One is propensity to give, and one is capacity to give. And he ranks them 1 through 5 in both categories. A 1 in propensity is not very likely to give, no real demonstration of philanthropic activity. 5 is, boy, they've been giving to me me and my organization for a long time, and they're really involved here. Capacity, a 1 might be capable of whatever that is for your organization, a lower level gift, and 5 would be a huge gift. If they're a 5 in capacity and a 1 in propensity, it doesn't matter how much money they have. They are very unlikely to give to your organization. What matters is their affinity to your organization, their propensity to give. So we need to be very in tune with not just people's overall wealth and how much they have, but how likely they are to give. There are poor people who are very selfish with their money. There are rich people who are very selfish with their money. There are poor people who are very generous with their money, and there are rich people who are very generous with their money. Rich doesn't mean selfish, poor doesn't mean generous, and we just need to keep that in mind as we work with all kinds of different folks. The importance of creating space for generosity. This goes back to the point of getting to know people, I think, personally as much as we can. Thanking well, updating well. My organization has about 4,000 donors in any given year. We couldn't possibly get to know all 4,000 donors, but we can thank them well. We can definitely, through our updates, keep them updated very well on what their gifts are achieving. And I think that creates the space for people to be more generous.
We work with organizations all the time, and they might want to raise, again, 10,000 or 1 million. And I always tell them that God can provide this money any way that he wants to, but I can tell you how the Lord usually provides that to organizations. And I'll just give you a picture here. Someone talked about a rule of thumb of, if we're raising 10,000, maybe we need 50 or 60% of that. That's probably a little high about how money comes in, but let's just say if we need 10,000, a rule of thumb would be you probably need one gift of 15 or 20% of that amount. I'm going to put 20%. The rule of thumb used to be 10%, and it's kind of now a little closer to 20%. You're going to probably need a couple of gifts at least 5% of the goal. And then you're going to need another group of major gifts that would be, maybe 2 to 5% of the goal. In other words, even if you're talking to, let's just say, 100 people about this project, it's going to be probably the top 10 that will provide 50, 60, 70% of that total. Does that make sense? And again, God can do this any way he wants, and there might be great examples in this room of how it has been done in another way. But I think that's the reality of how we see, because of the way wealth is distributed and the way that it comes in. That's pretty much the way it will work for most fundraising projects. And you can even take your operational budget for the year. How much gift income do you need to balance your budget? It probably will fit along these lines. If you go back and look at that, if you raised $50,000 in the last year, I'd be willing to bet that if you look how it's distributed, it would come in about this way. And there'd be a whole bunch of people that are giving gifts here to get you to the finish line, but you probably need these people to make it.
The overarching principle, again, is a large percentage of the money that we need for our organizations to move them forward is going to come from a small percentage of the people, and that is just fundraising reality, and we have to pay attention to that. Okay, some of the implications of how money flows. So large to small, we've hit on that several times, and that's just super important to keep in mind. Inside to outside, and this is a really important point. We talked about it a little bit last night. We'll talk about it later in the characteristics of what makes a really good fundraiser. But if we in our organizations aren't giving to our organizations financially, there is a strong likelihood that we're not going to be able to motivate others to give to our organizations. My dad mentioned last night that when he started the first day at every organization, he would make his first gift to that organization. And I think that's a really good practice. I'm not saying you have to give a certain percentage or a certain amount, but I think what we need to do as fundraisers, whatever our role in the fundraising task is to make sure that we're modeling the type of behavior that we want to see from other people. If we're not modeling cheerful and generous giving, as Paul called us to, then other people are not going to be able to follow us as well. But if we model cheerful, generous giving to our organizations, if we're truly committed in that way, other people will follow that. And we need to encourage our peers to do that as well. We need to encourage all staff at the organization to give financially and to be part of the fundraising mission. Just another issue is Matthew 6:21. It's Matthew 6:21, right? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. When we put our money into our ministry, it puts more of ourselves into that ministry, and that is very attractive to other people. Inside to outside, so I think it's really important that staff contribute financially to the organization. It also means your board. How many, and I'm sure we're gonna set off a firestorm here. How many people have been frustrated with how much, or in some cases, how little, if anything at all, their board members give?
How many have a board?
How many have a board at all at your organization? Okay. And how many of us are completely satisfied with our board's giving? My guess would be very few. But that's another important point, that if our board members, the people who are tasked with overseeing our organizations, with providing governance, with keeping the mission on track, are not modeling that cheerful generosity that we are called to as Christians, it's going to be much harder for other people to follow that. When your boards do model that, it is much easier for other people outside the organization to follow their lead. If you haven't had these discussions with your board or with your board chair, you should do that. You need to do it tactfully and carefully and respectfully, but it is a conversation that's worth having, and I think any Christian would understand that they need to model the behavior that they're asking other people to exhibit as well. Last point, don't despise the small gift. We've hit on that a few times. Just because we need big gifts to make everything work doesn't mean that we can look down at givers or gifts that are less than, that are on the smaller side. Often those gifts are given with great sacrifice. The smallest gifts are given with great sacrifice. And that's borne out, at least by the data in the United States, that in the United States, which is one of the most supposedly charitable state or charitable countries in the world, the percentage of wealth given by people lower on the income scale is much higher than the percentage given by people who are making those big gifts. So we cannot let ourselves fall into the trap of looking down on someone or looking down on their gift because of its size.